It could be good news, it could be bad news, so we'll see how it goes. So as we go through today, I did speak a little bit to some of the information and some of the resources that are in front of you. We also have resources at the back. I'll show you a few of them that we do have available, including those USB sticks. I was just mentioning to one lady here, we do have organic, because I heard a few of you are organic producers. Sorry. And we do have organic fact sheets. I'll have to double check the USB sticks. We might not have both of the organics one because we're never always certain of the audience. But if I can't, they do have Wi-Fi here, so I might be able to access them and load them onto the stick. If not, for those of you that are organic, I can do that tonight. I can take them home with me, and I can on your sticks that you get, I can put some of those organic fact sheets. Now, a lot of them is about an introduction into organic farming and organic composting, but still a lot of it's very useful information. So if you do fit into that category, let me know, and I'll get your name, and then I'll take you home, and I'll do it if I can't do it here at the end of the session today. So everybody seems all eager to listen to me speak, so we'll get going. So I do speak for, as you can see on the agenda, most of the day today, and thankfully only part of tomorrow. So I will try and keep it somewhat, as best and interactive as we can. There's a few activities or group discussions, and I do really hope you take that opportunity to participate, because it's to only benefit you. I'm here delivering the information, but it's you that needs to get out of it the most that you can. Also, I'm going to ask my colleague Lorraine to try and keep me on track as far as time. What we're going to do, you see in a lot of the agenda there that has my name and Khadijah's name as well. So what we've decided to do is, not that Khadijah was delivering this information, but at the end of the session we're going to look like my sections. We're going to leave about 10 to 15 minutes, and that's the opportunity for Khadijah to come up, because she is an auditor and she has been on farm auditing premises, to discuss some of those things that either she sees typically producers or processors having challenges, or where there might be some deficiencies, and just to share that experience with you, and that's your opportunity to maybe ask a little bit more details about the specific things that we'll be talking about. There was something else I was going to mention. Doesn't matter. We'll just get started, and then we'll go with the flow and see what happens. But I do really want it to be, if you want to ask questions or for those interactive parts, and that's what I look forward to. And again, that's your opportunity to learn what you can from this. I do remember. As we go through this information, you're probably going to start to think, well, that's pretty straightforward. I get that. That's common sense. A lot of it is common sense. But, so there's the good in that and the bad in that. The good in that is that it is common sense. You're like, hey, I do this every day, or that's easy. The bad in that, or the unfortunate part in that, is the fact that because we do it every day, we become a little bit complacent and maybe don't realize that there's actually risks in some of those practices that we're doing or that might be on the farm. I'm not sure, I've heard statistics, whatever, I don't have specific numbers out in my mind, but totally not related to what we're talking about today as far as food safety goes, but they often say, when someone's going to have a car accident, a lot of it's like in that last 5 minutes to home, because you're already at home. You're like, oh, I'm here, I'm used to the surroundings, I'm already thinking about what I'm going to be doing, because you're so used to your surroundings, you're not realizing that there's still risk. So you kind of relate that back to the farm. You do it every day, you don't realize that, hey, you know what? There could be an issue here. So this is our job today to say, hey, take a step back, take the information I'm delivering today and see how it might relate to your farm. Whether it's organic or conventional, it's still food safety. Someone will be consuming that product, so you want to make sure that that product is safe. So just always keep that in mind, and if there's anything you can relate back to your farm, then that's what's most important. So the first part of the work of practices, I'm just going to do sort of an overview and introduction, and then we'll get into more specifically the 5 top food safety risk areas. So we'll deliver, I guess, 4 of them today and then 2 of them tomorrow. And then if any of you did take an opportunity to go through any of those self-assessments, you might have some questions relating to those, and that is an opportunity for us to discuss that. And again, those are just typically requirements that some of the food safety programs would want to do, and so those, kind of keep that in the back of your mind as we go through. So why are we all here? Why are Loblaws? Why is retailer? Why are the consumers wanting more of this? Well, because a lot of people be getting sick, and typically there's millions of people annually that suffer from illnesses or foodborne related illnesses. And these are only the reported ones. There's many that go unreported. Many people think it might be the flu or something else. In actual fact, it could be foodborne related, but we don't realize that it is because there hasn't been further investigation, people to stay home. Typically, it is that consumption of, a contaminated product that makes us sick. And this costs the Canadian economy tons of money for very many different reasons, but also if it is a foodborne related incident and it's related back to that, it costs the agri-food industry a lot of money as well. And when I say that it's costing us, I mean it's our economic losses that are associated with that type of foodborne outbreak. So again, there's an added factor as to why we want to ensure that the food that you're producing is safe. So bringing it back to the farm, so I'm sure if you think in the last, even decade if you want, I know that sounds like a long time, but you probably think, gosh, I'm hearing more and more about outbreaks, more and more about food-related incidents. And I know that in other parts of that statement is probably like, yeah, but hardly any in Canada. Just scratch that, put that out of your mind for the moment. There's a lot of more foodborne illness and food-related incidents for a number of reasons. One is that sort of shift in trend in people's habits. People tend to, that healthier aspect, eating more fresh fruits, less maybe processed or refined product. So that's that fresh products and like fruits and vegetables. And by doing that, they're eating things that might not have been cooked. So I'm not saying that things have to be cooked for it to be healthy or unhealthy, but what I'm saying is that when you have a fresh product, it doesn't go through that kill step. So, yes?
When you look at that, it looks as if a significant number of food safety related incidents originate on the farm. When was the last time there was a recall for a food safety related incident in Ontario?
And I'm getting to that a little bit about the food.
Because that looks as if every farm is at risk, but we're the safest place. There never has been a recall from a farm in Ontario.
Right, and so, okay, so yes, you're correct in saying that, but what the statement is about is the fact that because farms are that primary part of production, that's where there's a greater incident because of that direct contact with workers and with humans where that incident can happen. You have that contact with water that could be contaminated, you have that contact with soil amendments that could happen, and I'm going to show you a couple more, and I think it's the next slide or the slide after that, about some of the food-related incidents that have resulted as far as because of those incidents on farm. Sure, might not be in Ontario, but if you've produced, might as well just get to that slide now, I guess. If you produced one of these products, or everyone I'm sure remembers the spinach product, the spinach recall outbreak in 2006. Okay, wasn't here, it's California, right? I'm sure every producer can account to a reduction in sales, regardless if they're in Ontario, the United States, wherever. And as a secondary fact, Kraft actually reported a 40% reduction in their sales because people weren't eating salads.
Yeah, so
that's not a farm. But it's a direct relationship because there was a recall. When people hear that there's a food safety related incident or a product that's being contaminated, whether it's being the tomatoes, it wasn't actually the tomatoes, it was the serrano peppers, people stopped eating tomatoes. And Ellen's shaking her head. She produces processed tomatoes. It's just, there's just that relationship. It's that knee-jerk reaction to people can have more information about that product. If there is a food safety related incident associated to a type of commodity or a type of product, there's going to be an impact and it's typically negative. Unless you can prove otherwise, but that takes time. It takes time for people to go to whichever farm or wherever it happened from. But that's what we're talking about. If there's a way that you can continue keeping your product safe, which is great that we haven't had it in Ontario, and we can keep it that way, so that if there are other outbreaks, we can say, yes, but we're focused on food safety, and this is what we're doing to keep it that way. that's the importance of it. It's almost like your insurance plan for your car. You have insurance every day. Do you use it every day? No. But if you're in an accident, you're sure as heck happy that you have it. So it's kind of that reassurance for your own product and your own farm. So what I have up here are just three major incidents that have happened within the last decade. You can see one was in bean sprouts, one was in cantaloupe. I'm sure we all remember that one, the listeria outbreak in cantaloupe, and then the spinach one. All of them were caused for different reasons. And you can see that the one from the sprouts, that was from the water. They were grown hydroponically, and they thought that the water that was grown was contaminated. With the cantaloupe, that actually ended up being the cleaning and sanitation program within the facility. It was very lacking, very poor. The conditions inside the facility were not great. And there were some other factors that, because they didn't have this cleaning and sanitation program in place, the contaminants that came in from the outside then contaminated the whole packing facility, in addition to the condition of the equipment that they were using, which led to this massive outbreak, which led to many people dying, lots of people sick, farms bankrupt, the auditing company is being sued as well, and many other economic losses in that, not to mention the cantaloupe industry as a whole. And this isn't people that were just involved in that, that's cantaloupes everywhere. And then with the spinach outbreak in 2006, that was as a result of contaminated irrigation water. And we'll talk a little bit more about that outbreak as we go through the discussion today. But the reason why I have these three up here is, again, to talk a little bit more to that lady's comment, but it just shows that, you know, people became sick because of these outbreaks. Some people died. Huge economic losses, whether it be for that specific commodity or within the agriculture industry. And really, it just makes us really take a look at, you know, we've got to make sure that there's measures in place to keep our products safe. Now, I know there's the second comment, well, I've never had an issue. I've been farming for 30 years, or the farm's been I'm the 5th generation farmer. That's fantastic that you haven't had that situation. And I'm sure each one of these facilities probably had that same statement, but now they don't, right? So just because it hasn't happened doesn't mean it can't. And I'm not saying that people are bad or not doing good things properly. All of you are probably doing 80, 85, 90%, because you just go through that as well. It comes down to when you're looking at the food safety program and documenting what you're doing in that due diligence. Now, you're going to say, okay, well, records aren't going to make my product any more safe. You're right, absolutely correct. It's not going to make your product any more safe. But what it is going to do, if there is an issue, you're going to say, hey, I have documentation to show. I truly believe in food safety. I train my workers. They understand why they're doing it. It's a food safety culture at my premise, and this is what I'm doing. So if there was, say you might have been the unfortunate person that, you know, maybe your neighbor and you produce the same product and they had an issue with their product, but how are you going to prove it's one or the other? You both ship to the same wholesaler. Well, again, that's that insurance, a little bit of that reassurance that you can provide with. There we go, there's one. See, it's dying, so I gotta move on. So, but anyways, enough about that, but it's just trying to put in perspective and just trying to get us all on the same page. You know, it is important, so we really need to show that and prove that to you know, our consumers and reassure them that we are doing what we can do to keep our products safe. So we have touched on this a little bit already, that food contamination or contamination of your product can occur at any place in the farm at any stage in production. There is a higher risk when there is that direct contact with workers or with individuals. And that's only because of the other practices, so because they're using washroom or, you know, there's that potential, I know we don't like to think about it, but there is that potential for fecal contamination or other illnesses and viruses that can be transferred from humans, so that is a big risk. And then just even other things like the cantaloupe, where it could be your equipment that might be dirty, or out in the environment if you're using manure or soil amendments. Again, you got to think about what could be in those things that you're using in your production and what can contribute to the safety of your product. So always keep in mind, anything that comes in contact with your product has the potential to be contaminated. Just always keep that in mind. So that's where you have to say, okay, is there a risk here? If there is, what can I do? Is it feasible for me to do? Is it practical to do? And then that's where you start to base on what things you can start to put in place and implement at your farm to reduce those risks. So there's three main hazards that would typically cause contamination of a product. Those are biological, chemical, and physical. Biological, we're more concerned obviously about the ones that are pathogens. Pathogens are those ones that are cause human illness, make people sick, and basically cause those issues. So that could be bacteria, viruses, fungi. And these are the ones that are going to be most common for the food recalls or the outbreaks because of that potential to make people sick. For chemical hazards, that's where you might have, maybe excessive chemical residues or toxins or cross-contamination, with peanuts versus a different type of product. My son has a peanut allergy. So it's very important to me that people that might produce, that topic or that product, that there's measures in place that, if he wants to eat a strawberry or if he wants to eat celery or something, that there isn't that chance. I'm just throwing it out there, but it's just to put it into perspective. And then physical hazards are those ones that would, cause your choking injuries or those unfavorable results. So that would be your inorganic substances like glass, metal, pieces of wood that might get stuck in your product, or if you're further processing a product, those are things that you need to be cognizant of. Excuse me. So I identified with the biological hazard that there is that focus on those because of the potential to cause foodborne illness and that risk to human health. The other thing with biological hazards, and again, when we talk about biological hazards in this perspective throughout any of the topics, it's based on pathogens. So just always keep that in mind. If I don't say pathogens, that's what we're talking about. Because you do have transient resident bacteria even on your body, but it's not causing you any harm. But typically when we think of pathogens, the risk with those is that if they are detected on product, is usually because there's some sort of fecal contamination. And I know it's a horrible thought, but that is the reality of it. And then I have some examples in there of what pathogens could be. I mean, we all know E. coli, Salmonella, Campylobacter, hepatitis A, that's one that's been involved in a few outbreaks. And then there's Giardia, Viridium. Again, most of those are because it's been found to be shed in some sort of fecal matter. So pathogens can be a little bit tricky because of their attributes. They very easily can attach themselves to surfaces, and when it comes to product, that could be leaves or the actual product, like the consumable product itself. They also have that ability to form a very tight biofilm. People are like, well, what's a biofilm? So that's basically just a really strong, dense layer of bacteria. It's a fun little colony that, so once you get a couple joining on the surface, if those couple aren't removed by consistent cleaning or removal or sanitation, then gradually they get to build up, and then that's a biofilm. But once that biofilm forms, it's very difficult to remove. So keep that in mind. Again, that's another sort of, a point for cleaning and sanitation, that regular cleaning and sanitizing is going to help keep that biofilm not getting started and not building up. And that biofilm can form both on the product, on the leaves, but where you would see it more is sort of on your equipment. So it could be, your processing equipment. It might even be in your irrigation equipment or your irrigation lines. Even if you think maybe even at home, on sometimes you remove that screen on your tap and there's kind of like slime. That's a biofilm. So just to give you an idea, that's what starts to form. And then also, pathogens can very easily get into water by, runoff or leaching. We'll talk a little bit more about that. They can contaminate the surrounding area, so it might be even the soil. And I know that sounds kind of weird, like, well, it's dirt. Of course it's dirty. It's got stuff in it. Yes, it does. But if you're adding things to it, such as manure or compost teas or something else to it that could have the potential, for those pathogens, and that it can contaminate that environment, which then can be transferred. Yes?
It's like stupid, but...
No stupid questions.
Does bird poop do the same thing as ours kind of thing?
Does it have pathogens in it? Yeah, actually some animal feces, and a little bit more, we'll talk about that too. It's good that you brought that up. Like mice, for instance, they actually have like certain viruses in their fecal matter that actually it can be quite harmful to people when they actually inhale it. So not so specific to food safety, but yeah, so birds can have shed pathogens as well. I mean, chickens, right? Salmonella. So chicken, they're birds. So they have that ability as well. So you're probably saying, well, gosh, how can I stop a bird from pooping on my fruit, right? That's probably the next question on my product. You can't, unless there are screens or netting that you could use. But again, they're not going to poop on everything. And it's, as you go through it, you start to make those educated choices and training your workers that say, hey, you know what, if there's like poop on the product, we can afford to not harvest that one piece of cabbage today. It's just making those choices that are going to work for you, that are practical choices. So, I'm sure you're already starting to think, oh my gosh, pathogens are everything, there's risk everywhere, why am I even doing this anymore? Like, what's the point? There's just so many things I can't even account for it anymore. Yes, there is potential for a lot of food safety risk on the farm, a lot of risk in general. But the thing is, there are things, you gotta always put it back in perspective. What's practical? Like the teacher said, maybe there's certain things that you just can't do. But you have to still try to address what that risk is and try and put something in place. You'll find with any food safety program that you look at, I call it a genetic makeup. So you're gonna have, you're always gonna have stuff related to workers, cleaning and sanitizing, whether or not you use soil amendments, do you use water, whether it be irrigation or post-harvest, pest control. There's always going to be those main components that make up any food safety program or any type of food safety related items or agenda. There's been identified sort of like a top 5 list, and those are the top 5 that that the Growing Forward 2 program is also sort of focused on. And those are the ones that are typically going to cause those food, that are more associated with those foodborne related outbreaks, and there's basically that higher potential or probability for them to occur. And the 5 lists are there, and those are the 5 that we'll be delivering information on. So that's your worker practices hygiene, and it might not say, I think in yours is called personal hygiene, right? So just because it's not the exact same wording, it means the same thing. Water, we're going to talk about it in pre and post harvest uses, cleaning and sanitizing, pest control, building maintenance, and visitors. We've grouped those together, so you'll find out why, but they seem kind of like unlikely pairings, but we talk about those as well, and then if you use soil amendments, which follows manure, compost, and compost teas. So you say, okay, I've got all these things I need to think about. Where do I even get started? So we've got, you're here at the farm. So basically, with anything, the first step is trying to identify where are those risks and how do they apply to you. Again, you and your neighbor might produce the exact same product. That's great, that's fine. But your risks and their risks might not be the same. Sure, you're going to have sort of your general risks that you need to account for, and those are, again, if you have workers and blah, 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 blah. But you'll have to look at what's specific to your premise and what's specific to your farm, and then that's where you start to tick off the ones in the manual or when you're making your food safety program or those good agricultural practices. What is specific to you and your operation, and what risks do you have in your operation? So that's here. So things that you start to think about, okay, well, do I use water on my farm? Do I have workers or not have workers? Now, you might not have workers, but that doesn't mean you don't consider the risks that are involved with that direct contact, because somebody is harvesting your product unless it's a processed product. And then just other things. So just, again, taking a step back and thinking about what are those, especially looking at those top 5, kind of start use that as your basis, excuse me, and then as you follow through with the rest of the program. So once you identify what they are, now you have to sort of start to think about what can I do to help reduce that, mitigate them, and then by doing that, you start to implement and design your good agricultural practices. So a lot of people have come to me, or I'm sure come to Katija, many people say, I need GAP. I need to get GAP. I need a GAP certificate, I need GAP. All GAP stands for, and it's not the clothing outfit, although it does stand for that as well, but it's good agricultural practices. It's not a thing, it's not something you can buy off the shelf. It's basically just a practice that's put in place to help reduce those risks. So when you start to implement those good agricultural practices, and again, you train everybody on your farm, and everybody's aware of what that is, and you develop a food safety program, and then by doing that, now you're starting to demonstrate, you know what, food safety is important to me, and I can prove it to you because of the due diligence, and that's what you have in your records and your policies or your checklists that you might have. more of an outline of what a good agricultural practice is. So first you identify those risks, then you start to put in policies, procedures, and based on those policies and procedures, you train the workers or the people that might be having that direct contact or working on your premises at your farm or your operation, and that's going to help reduce the risk. All of those things together make a good agricultural practice, or a GAP. When you have a series of those, because you're going to basically have one GAP sort of per risk, and that sounds a little bit daunting, but it's really not, especially with the manual that Canada Gap has developed, that you just check off how it goes along. You don't have to handwrite your policies or procedures. That becomes your policy and procedure book. But when you have a series of these GAPs, that's what makes your food safety program. That's that big binder. Yes, it seems daunting, and my only word of advice is one page at a time. That's the easiest way to manage it, because if you start flipping through and going, oh my gosh, what about this, what about that, you'll get there. But the best way is just one page at a time, and different people can contest to it today, because I know there's a few people in the room that have sort of started that process that say, you know what, yeah, and some sections will fly by, yep. Others will be like, oh, I actually have a few things to do here. They might be a little bit more involved, but it's all laid out there, and that's how you start to go through and manage your program. So when we talk about food safety and what that entails, again, this is all related back to the good agricultural practices. You write, train, do. These are the three pillars. So you identify those risks, but then you're going to write something that's sort of correlated to that risk. So that would be your policy or procedure. Then you're going to train or get training. If it's just you and just yourself, you're going to get training or be trained on that type of information. And then the most important part, you're actually going to do it. And that's the implementation. Whoops, sorry. See, I'm not good with technology. That's the most important piece, is the doing. And by doing that, you want to make sure that if you've trained your workers to do it, that they're doing it properly. If you're the one that's doing it, you want to make sure also that you're doing it. So, it's good to have those checkpoints. So this is just more words that go to those. But the important piece is at the bottom here, especially if you're on a food safety program or looking to go that way or looking to be certified, you will need to have records and you will need to have documented procedures. If you're not going that way, it doesn't mean it all goes out the window. There's still, that information is very useful and very important to help even just, keep you, I don't want to say honest, but just keep you in the moment and in the habit of food safety. So now we're going to get, I pulled worker training and record keeping out to the front, and it seems maybe, I used to have it at the end of my presentations, but I think it's important to say, okay, what would I train on? Why is this important? And it sort of, again, puts it all into perspective, say, okay, I need to make sure that I'm training people in all these things and these different aspects and why I'm doing it, and then once you get that out of the way, then we can just look at the details. And there's not a lot in this section here. But, why is worker training important? Why is it important to be aware? Well, if the people that you have working for you, if they're not aware, again, of what those risks might be, and either the commodity that they're working in, or, maybe they're a transient worker, maybe they, you share them. Maybe that happens a lot in our area. I live in Delhi, and you'll have, offshore labor force come in, but depending on the product, you might work in asparagus one week, go to strawberries the next, not 1 week or a month, and carry on. So the different commodities. So it's really important that you're training them on what specific risks are related not only to that commodity, but to your premise. So it's really important to provide that awareness of why they're doing something and how they're supposed to be doing it. So again, it's that who, what, where. And keeping that consistent messaging. You don't want to be telling one person to do it one way and then the next person to do it a different way, because then they're going to be like, look, it's not going to be done properly. And then that's when there's issues that start to arise. And also, I think when you have that open dialogue, and I realize sometimes there can be some language barriers, but when you have that sort of open forum and you set that level of comfort with your workers, if there ever ends up being a problem, say something, and accidents happen, so say something happens, then I think there's they're a little bit more comfortable to be able to come talk to you, or if they've seen something, or all of a sudden they're seeing like a little mouse family, around your packaging, that they're not shy to come and tell you that they're, what, hey, I know it's important to you, so I'm telling you, rather than say, oh well, whatever, who cares, I'm just going to carry on and do my job, that's what I'm paid to do, right? So it really does enhance that food safety awareness and that food safety culture that's on your premise. So it's good to sort of have, I call it a training to-do list, but, those important key times of when your workers need to be trained. And that's definitely at the start of a new season. Before they touch anything on your operation, train them. Because that's, again, you don't want accidents to happen before they know what they're supposed to be doing. Even if you have workers that have been there for 30 years. I mean, I forget what I did yesterday, let alone what I did last year. So it's important to, refresh that training, keep them up to date, or maybe maybe something's changed. Maybe you've changed it, or maybe you've got to use some equipment. So make sure that you're always constantly training them. It's recommended at least at the start of the season, and then maybe a refresher. If it's, you might have the same crew for harvest, you might have a different crew for harvest. So, there might be different things that you need to let them know about. Maybe an incident happens. Say, oh, I thought I trained you guys in this, but this is a great opportunity to maybe just do a little bit of refresher, just to make sure, again, that everyone's on the same page and they're delivering that same message. It's very important to make sure that, sure, you went and told them, but you go tell them, and then you go one way and they go another, and then that's the end of it, to the end of the season. You want to make sure that they're actually doing what you've asked them to do. This point here about keeping a assigned trainer very important, especially, well, I'd like to say even if you're on an audited program, it's very important to keep that signed training record. One, if there's an incident and you know that individual was trained, you can say, you can pull that back and say, well, you signed, I trained you on that information. You signed off. You signed off acknowledging that you understood what you're talking about. And it's not to put blame or anything like that, but say, hey, if we didn't, then either there's something wrong with the information that I trained you on, or maybe there's an issue here that we need to address, and maybe the information that I provided just isn't working for the type of task or the situation that we're creating. But it's important for an audit program for that validation of your due diligence for training. So you want to make sure that the trainer identifies what they're training on, and we'll talk a little bit more about it later. But because you already pointed out the C&D forms in that Canada Gap manual, that's a really great reference. You don't have to do, maybe you don't have all of it. That's a really good starting point. So you want to make sure that you're identifying what you're training them on, who did the training, who took the training, and the date that it was, and that they've signed off. I've had some people also say to me, well, what if they can't write their names? And we joked about, well, get a stamp and put their thumbprint. Or maybe you might be able to have, a representative, and Khadija can speak maybe a little bit more to that on how they accept those things, but most people can put some sort of signature beside their name to identify this. Yes? I
was wondering if the ministry had any resources to assist with training on this in Spanish.
Yes, we do. And I'll get to that, I think, in a couple slides, but so let me just finish up here, and then I'll show you some of our resources that we do have. But Spanish is one of the main languages. If we do have an alternate, we always have to do French, just because of, with the province of Ontario, obviously the Ontario government. But we did do sort of like a scan, a Roberta scan, and we talked to some different agencies and that was one of a very prominent sort of labor force language. Now there's a lot of others like Trinidad and Punjabis, and that one we've been asked for. We haven't gone that route yet, but as we get more requests, then that's something that we're going to be reevaluating and looking where we need to support that need. So here's an example of a training record template. You have one in that manual. Sorry, I forgot to fill one. I'm sure most of you figured out that all these are in that white binder now. So you'll see that there's an example. This is just a suggested thing, but again, you can see some of those important pieces of information. What farmer was on. Maybe you have different operations. The year, very important, because again, that's something that you want to make sure that your records and what you're being audited on, or even just all your records are for that production season. Again, if there was ever an issue, that's another really good important point. And then the day of the training, sort of, was it, just first time training, was it refresher training, who did the training, the name of the worker printed, you can also include if the material that they were trained on, which is really important, especially if there's different crews for different tasks, and then the initials or the full signature of the worker. So why is it important? And you're gonna be like, oh, she said that 50 times already. And yes, there's a lot of repetition throughout this today. I think they say I can tell you 7 times before you remember it, so hopefully it won't be 7 times, but there is a lot of, when we talk about certain pieces that are important, and there is a little bit of repetition, so just maybe a little bit patient with that, but it is good. It's really important to understand and to know why these things are important. So record keeping, it is a means to track and confirm what you're doing. But you can also use that information to identify trends. You know, if you have a pest control program and, you know, you're looking, you know, say you have 10 traps, and you're like, gosh, 3 and 4, we have trap mice in them like 24/7, what's going on? Perfect opportunity to say, hey, you know what? Either let's go look at it. Maybe I have a lot of bushes in that area, or long grass, or old, you know, just a mound of old equipment, or tree clippings that I haven't got rid of. So maybe that's an opportunity. Or say, you know what, maybe we need to add more traps here. You know, there's opportunities that you can learn from that information that you're collecting. And then lastly, and this is the part that I have said a lot, it does demonstrate your due diligence. And if someone was ever to ask you, you're a consumer, somebody might say, hey, well, what do you do for food safety? Hey, look, I train my workers. This is, you know, you might have signs, you might, you know, all of that just reassures the people that are buying your product that, you know, you are focused on food safety, and that means a lot to you. We talked a little bit about part of your, you know, developing those GAPs or those good agricultural practices, that you need procedures in place or policies. There's the written sort of standard operation procedures, but then there's also this procedure template. And this is where you're going to do that who, what, where, why, when. And if I speak too fast, just tell me to slow down. So this is just an example template. It's not saying that you have to use it. You can create your own. But one thing I do suggest, if you do have a lot of different procedures at your premises, it's a really great idea to maybe create a template and follow the same template through. So just think of yourself, if you go to, I don't know, a recipe, and this is basically just a recipe for people to do things. And you say, okay, I've got this recipe, blah, 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 then you go to the next one, you're like, oh, wait a minute, why is it telling me that, what do I need? Like, maybe it's telling you how to do it first before all the tools that you need. So by having a template in place, and something that's, you know, standard, they know where to find that information quickly, especially if they're using it as a reference material. So just, like I said, just a piece of advice, if you can have a template and use the same template for all your procedures, it makes life easier. I can go back for a second. One important thing to identify in your template is this last piece. It doesn't have to be the last part on it, you can get here wherever you want, but, you know, are there any records that are associated with this procedure? So again, we'll use pest control. So maybe you're going to monitor all your traps. Okay, so I'm monitoring them, but where am I recording that information? And that's where this is. So you want to identify what piece of information, where they need to be reporting that information. So these are your day-to-day checks, your ongoing templates. And then this is, again, just an example, but this is an example for water treatment. So this is the type of information you want to include. Now, in the Canada Gap manual, they have a lot of forms. And as the teacher said, some of them, you know, you might not all pertain to you. When you go through the actual written part of the standard, it's important to know what they're asking for. You can have your own procedure, you can have your own template, just whatever they're asking for, make sure you've accounted for that in your template. So you can have your own forms, but just make sure that you're covering off all the information. So yeah, obviously farming, you're that primary source of production for that product, so you are that first step in the food safety chain in keeping your product safe. You play a very important role in mitigating risk right from the get-go. Yes, you know, there's that infamous, well, I have no control over the guy that's, you know, stocking my produce at the grocery store. You're right, you don't. But you have absolute control, for the most part, of what happens from the time that you start growing that product to the point that it gets to that store. And that's the part that you can be accountable for, and that's the part that you can show that you've done your due diligence. What happens afterwards, guess what? Then that's their problem. You know, you can do your best to ensure that people know that what you've done is your best. And what it really comes down to is that food safety is everybody's responsibility, and that everyone will benefit from us all doing this in place. So some of our resources, so now we'll touch on that a little bit. So I just have a slide that shows it, but in the back, and I do have these here with me for the sessions, so you can have these, all of our resources are free. I think we brought more than enough. You can have a couple of copies if you find them relevant to your operation. Some are very, I'll show the most favorite one that seems to be for everybody. But the one nice thing about these posters, in particular, they're tear-proof and water-resistant. So no more laminating, no more peeling, no more markers running, whatever. A little bit tricky to get a tack through if you are doing that. Staple gun will work wonders, but anyways, so this is a favorite one, but lots of reference materials. So these are our posters, and to answer your question about the multi-language, Our posters, we did them 2 ways. English is the dominant language at the top, or French, and then the secondary language for either the English poster or the French poster is Spanish. At this point, this is what we have. We don't have those other languages that I spoke of for this type of resource. Now, we also have, a few resources. We have our own manual, but it's not an automated program. We also have the USB stick that I'll provide you with. That does have our program on it, but don't get confused because it's not an automated program. If you want to be audited, I suggest, this one or whatever, if it's SQF or the other ones that you need to follow. And then we have the hand washing easel, which is here. And then we also have an iGap-CD, which basically has a couple videos. I didn't bring any of that, but if you want it, we can send it to you. You just identify that on that product survey. So when it comes to our hand washing easel, this is really great for training your workers, especially if there is some language barriers. With any of our resources, especially the posters or the hand washing easel, we really try to limit the words so that a picture says 1,000 words. And then for this particular resource, how it works. So this one's French, I believe. So these hand washing easels, you always get English as the primary. So I'm looking at the English side right now, but whoever you're training is looking at the opposite language. So there's French, Spanish, and Mandarin training. So at the time, again, because we thought about processing facilities in a lot of areas, that's another language. So again, potential opportunity to do more languages, but right at this time, this is what we have available. Yes?
On the OMAFRA design, it's a gap program, right?
Sorry?
You mentioned the OMAFRA gap program?
Yeah.
So is that for produce law or is it for everything?
That's just for producers, but there's a little bit of livestock in there as well, but it doesn't go to like the processing end of things. So it's just for basically on farm.
On farm.
Yeah.
On farm, yeah.
Yeah, and one of the reasons for creating that was that it could be sort of like that introductory, maybe not sure where you're going, just want to get your foot wet in food safety. It does provide a lot of background information and some other regulations. It identifies where some of those regulations might apply. And then if you're multi-commodity, it was sort of created for that, so that you can kind of use one manual for everything that you might be doing. But it's not an audited, it's not a certified program. It's just one that if you want to sort of get your feet wet in safety, that was its original intention. Yes.
You mentioned those discs with big. Are they Spanish too? Are they only a training tool or no? No,
this is again more for the producer. It's to basically the information I'm delivering to you today in a different type of a format. It follows our manual. It's not a DVD like movie. It's basically just an information resource. So the gap manual is on there. It's divided into sections. You kind of flip through the pages. It gives you the information. So it's not like a movie where you can train. Now, on our processing side of things, that group did create a series of training videos specifically for workers. And one on there is, like again, the personal practices and the personal hygiene. And even though it's focused more on a processing industry, again, a lot of those same things apply, and that is something that you can play for your workers. There's a lot of different, I think there may be 7 or 8 different languages that they've accomplished in that one.
And which one is that?
That's under the food industry side. It's a GMP disc. I'm trying to think of it. If you put that on your sheet there, like you can come up to me later and we'll put that on your sheet that we can send out the worker practices one to you. And like I said, I can't remember all the languages that it's in. It's focused on processing, but again, a lot of those general things that you need to know, they're all applicable, they're all relevant. You can always, make it happen for, again, like false fingernails and false, those type of items that you want to address anyways. And then we just have some additional resources going on. So I'm just going to sort of carry on here because I realize that I don't have any time. 5 to 11. So that means I've got not a lot of time. 35 minutes. Yeah, 35 minutes. So, okay, so I'm going to move on to the next one here. So that was the introduction. And I don't like to stand between people and their lunch, but we do have some stuff to get through, but it won't be too bad. But again, keep in mind it's just more of that background information. How can you relate it to your premises, and what things can you put in place to make it, maybe make it better for everybody. So, okay. So we always try and have some learning objectives, but overall the learning objectives for you today is hopefully that you can start to realize or understand what some of those risks are at your premises or your operation. Learn, maybe some mitigation strategies and, put those in place, or at least start to think about how those might apply and how you can make those work at your farm. So when we talk about worker practices, there's kind of like 4 buckets, I guess, that we look at that are very specific to workers and what the worker hygiene and their impact at your premise. And those fall into hand washing, toilet and hand washing facilities, clothing, footwear, personal effects, and illness and injury. So we're going to talk about those in each of their sections with some information. I did allude to a little bit before that when you have that direct contact with product, that there is a higher risk for food contamination. And as you can see on here on this particular survey that was done, that improper worker practices is the second leading cause for foodborne outbreaks. And that's typically, it could be, whether it's at a restaurant, whether it's on a farm, but it's that direct human contact. So cross-contamination, sorry folks, especially when we're looking at when people are involved, that can happen through, bodily fluids, so whether it's sneezing, urine, blood, vomiting. It can be on your hands, which obviously that's typically what you're going to have that direct contact with product with. It can be on your clothing and footwear, especially if you might have a multi-commodity farm, or you might have an area where you use manure and then you go to maybe harvest a fresh product. What's on your boots? So very good opportunity for cross-contamination there. And then equipment and other surfaces come into this play. This picture down here, we talked about the ginseng, the cantaloupe issue a couple years ago. This particular picture is actually of some equipment that was involved in that outbreak, and because of the poor sanitation conditions, that was the reason for that. And that's another reason why you see equipment and other surfaces on this list. So we've seen this already, good agricultural practices, what they are. So it's always good to start, it's great that we're all here and that we're talking about this, because it's really good to start it from the beginning, because then you don't have to try and fix what you've already put in place. So when you start to have that conversation with your workers, it's having those general conversations. We have this poster, this is just a general one about when handling food. Basically your things that you don't want your workers doing when they're in the production area or handling your food or harvesting, and just some good practices. Again, some of these posters, we kind of geared them so they could be used either on farm or in for processing, so that's why you see you're not going to have your workers maybe go out on the farm in a complete outfit like that. Mind you, if they're spraying chemicals, wouldn't be that far off probably, depending on the type of equipment that you have. Excuse me. But things that you want to talk to them about, if the sneezing and coughing, you want to make sure that they understand where they're supposed to be eating or drinking, that those things shouldn't be done when they're harvesting the product. If they happen to be on medications, you want to make sure that they're doing that in their staff area or their designated area, not on the product. Again, because that relates back to that chemical hazard where you can start to incorporate, toxins or other allergic reactions, because, obviously you don't want medications in your product. If you have anything that's loose, sorry, I'm pointing at that, I'm going to blind people with the laser here. So loose or exposed hair, so clothing, just some of those things that you need to start thinking about. And it's really important that you do have designated areas for eating and drinking, and even that's if they're in the harvest area, whether you have a bus that they might want to be able to eat on. You just don't want them doing it where they're going to be where your product is and that risk for contamination. So more specifically about hand washing, and this one's for you. Your bird there on the tree. So so it's important that we understand that hand washing is very important and that we take that into consideration. Again, because you want to make sure that your hands are being washed, after those things where there's a high risk, so after using the toilet, You know, if you're handling dirty or contaminated equipment, or if you have to touch a product that might have had poop on it that you didn't know, you know, you want to make sure that, oh gosh, I need to wash my hands. You know, and that could be, like I said, whether you're handling product that's being contaminated or maybe on the ground or stuff, you just gotta, it's again, just putting that awareness into their mind. When people, we hear this all the time, even from the public health units, you know, that when people aren't washing their hands a lot and frequently, that there's that increased risk of spreading disease or pathogens that's going to make people sick. Same rules apply for product. Because those pathogens can be easily transferred from one surface to another, it can easily be transferred to your product. And some people might think, well, my hands aren't dirty, they look clean. And we're going to do a hand demonstration in a minute to show that. But the degree of contamination on the hand isn't always visible to the eye because you can't see bacteria. Just because, you know, your hands, you know, look like this, but there might be lots of stuff on there. I mean, you never know. So just don't use that as a gauge of whether or not you should be washing your hands, because you should be washing them all the time. There was a survey done a while ago, not a while ago, but it was a sort of like a broad scoping one. It was more focused on people using, you know, what are their hand hygiene habits after using the toilet facilities. And you can see here that 68% of the people do not wash and dry their hands after using the toilet, so that's kind of a lot. Also, you know, some people, you'll just see them, they'll just sort of put their hands on the water, kind of do a quick rinse, and off they go. 20% do that. And then, sorry to tell you guys, but they also looked at gender differences, and men are a little bit more at fault at not washing their hands than women. So I'm not saying that, you know, they cause more incidents or anything like that, but it's just, it was part of the survey, so I just think it's important to mention. So it's just, the most important thing though is, look here, is that we contact a lot of surfaces throughout the day. You know, think of how often you wash your washroom, or, you know, touching that coffee cup, or money, you know, a lot of different surfaces, so there's a great opportunity to have a lot of pathogens present on our hands. You do have resident bacteria, those ones are fine, they're not going to harm you, but then there's those transient bacteria, and those are the ones that we're mostly talking about today. Those are the ones that are going to have that potential to cause contamination of the product. Oh, sorry, because it's a PDF, it's not going to work actually, but this little guy, usually when I click the button, this little guy goes from here over the door handle, and then when you touch the door handle, then it gets transferred. So I apologize, I got to keep that in mind that these are PDFs. So anyways, so I'd like to always talk a little bit about case studies, just again to sort of put it, how is this relevant to me, how is this applicable to me. This particular incident was with strawberries, and frozen strawberries at that. And I think that's an important point to mention, because a lot of people think, oh, it's being frozen, we're good. Bacteria survive, some can survive extreme heat, and some can survive like very low temperatures as well. And actually when scientists and microbiologists are doing their tests, they'll actually like cryogenically freeze them to like -80. So they can withstand some of those strong temperatures. So in this particular incident, these were frozen, and a school, like 900 people, doesn't really matter what the numbers, but a whole bunch of people had gone and eaten a lot of these packaged frozen strawberries. As a result, people started to get sick, and usually when one person's sick, you kind of like, oh, okay, 2, okay. You know, usually 2 is a limit, even when we start to look at a food safety recall. It usually takes 2 to start to spark that, you know, those questions and that investigation. So in this particular instance, 28 children became sick, and it was all, they started to link it back to eating those strawberries. So what had happened is, when they started to look a little bit deeper into the situation, they were able to trace it back to that single packing facility, which then led them back to a specific farm, which then led them back to a specific worker. In this particular case, the contaminant was hepatitis A, so that's a virus, very specific, because not all of us have hepatitis. But in this particular case, that a worker at the farm did, and when they started to you know, do surveillance at the farm, they identified that this one particular worker did have hepatitis A. It was the same strain, genetic strain, as what people were sick with. And how it had happened is they were de-stemming the strawberries by hand, and that particular individual, we'll just say, didn't use complete proper hand washing techniques. So whether they visited the washroom or somewhere throughout the day, their hands would become contaminated the strawberries because it was under the fingernails, destemmed strawberries. People ate those frozen strawberries and then contracted hepatitis A. I know, not a great thought to go home with, but that's the reality of it. So what do we learn from this? Well, one, that incidents could happen. It only takes one mistake for something to happen. But also our global food distribution system, it just takes one mistake to get very broadly widespread, especially if we're now shipping to those larger retailers where they're going to expand into a lot more things. When you think of that cantaloupe outbreak, I think there's 26 states very quickly became affected. That's half of the United States that became affected in that outbreak. So you can just see that it only takes one for something to happen. And then the other important fact is, I mean, that was hepatitis A, not something great to live with. People do recover from it. But if it had been E. coli or 157 or something else that was quite severe, because children fall into that sort of vulnerable, susceptible population, there probably would have been deaths to report because of this incident. So not a great outcome. So I've already showed you some of our resources we have to support good hand washing. But it is truly one of the, when we're talking about workers and the direct contact, hand washing is the single most important practice that people can implement to prevent the spread of disease. And you think, gosh, that's pretty basic. And it really is basic. And that's maybe, like I said, that unfortunate and good thing is it's basic, so it's easily to do, but it's basic and people maybe become a little bit not complacent about it. I like this slide because it kind of puts it all in perspective a little bit. What these things are, these are Petri dishes. And all Petri dishes, it has this sort of like a jelly in it, and what that is it provides a lot of nutrients for bacteria to grow in. So scientists or microbiologists will use this to do bacterial studies or microbiological studies. So what you see here, you can see there's four distinct fingerprints. So someone just not washed their hands and stuck their 4 fingers to the Petri dish. So that's all this fluffy, white, greeny stuff that you see, that's bacterial growth. So what the next one shows is that again, someone just pressing their fingers, but they only went and rinsed their hands, just with water. So this is what you're seeing. You can see, okay, maybe a little bit of reduction, but I wouldn't say anything to write home about. There's still quite a significant amount of contamination on that Petri dish. Now, number 3 is a depiction of what you would see after proper hand washing techniques. That's soap, water, potable water, the washing and drying. And you can see there's a little bit left, but that's that resident bacteria, that's fine, it's not going to harm you. And this is when it says good enough, that's good enough if you don't have sort of a communicable disease. So if you're not suffering from vomiting or diarrhea, this would be good enough. If you happen to have something like that, then you would want to make sure that you're following up your hand washing regime with a sanitizer. But as a side note to that, we'll talk a little bit more about that in this particular deck.
Surely if you've got a worker with vomiting, you'll send them home and not expect them to be working and doing, okay.
Exactly.
They help you.
But some workers are paid by piecework. I mean, that's how they get paid, and some of them won't tell you. Again, it's that open dialogue I think that you need to have with the workers. Like, you need to tell me, or hey, you know what? If that person's maybe not feeling the greatest, if there's an opportunity, maybe go cut the grass. Maybe, I know that sounds kind of whatever, but you don't have 50 people go cut the grass. I hope you don't have 50 people sick. If you do, then maybe there's a food safety issue. But again, it's being able to identify that there's a risk, if that person's identified that. If there's an opportunity for them to do something that's not food related at your operation, but they can still, if they're vomiting and that, sure. I mean, I wouldn't want to be at work if I'm vomiting and all that stuff. But they might just have a cold. Maybe they have hepatitis A. Maybe, those are things that you need to identify and put other measures in place. So this is the proper hand washing technique. Yes, it's not rocket science, but there is a specific, methodology to it. People said you don't sing happy birthday twice or alphabet song, whatever floats your boat, but basically make sure you're washing your hands with soap and potable water for a good 15 to 20 seconds, and that you're making sure that you're doing everything, in your fingers, around your wrists. Friction is what's going to help dislodge the pathogens. And then you want to make sure that you're having thorough coverage. You're going to rinse thoroughly, because that's going to remove the soap and anything that's attached to the soap and any sort of outstanding pathogens. And then this is kind of an important one that people, I think, would probably fall maybe the most on. Having that single-use paper towels. Yes, there's a waste issue there as far as now we're contributing to waste. But with that process of actually like drying your hands, any pathogens that are collected are on the paper towel, they're getting thrown in the garbage. If you have a terry cloth towel, you think I'm going to go dry my hands, that's great. So all the pathogens are now sitting on that terry cloth towel. Well, your buddy comes along and says, my hands are nice and clean, I'm going to dry them off now too. Well, back to that transferring of pathogens, they're just sitting there waiting, that dirt on the doorknob, just sitting there waiting. And you can think after a day, a week, how often do you clean those towels? What's going to be sitting on there? So, again, it's kind of what's going to be practical and feasible, but having, that type of towel is not ideal. If for you that's the only thing, then you have to put something in place, like a cleaning and sanitizing program for those terry-use towels. Whether it's a day, at the end of every day, every half day, they go and get laundered. So now you're just, it's what you're willing to accept and accomplish. We do have a hand down, but I'm going to go through the information first, I think, just so that we do cover off the information, and then that might be something fun to do later. Sorry. Although maybe it'd be good right now, but I do want to get through the information, so maybe we'll just save that, and then if there's maybe time later on today, we'll do that. Because I think it is important, because it really does, I think, open people's eyes of how effective proper hand washing is. So we're just going to skip that, and we'll carry on. A lot of people say to me, well, I don't have running water out in the field. I don't have portable access to water when I'm out, however many kilometers away or how many acres away. But the same rules apply. You want to make sure that you have the friction, the coverage, and the time. So there are techniques and things that you can do. Again, this is one of our posters, but there are processes in place. So some people just go ahead and say, okay, I can use the hand sanitizer on my hands. Well, you can, but if you have any visible dirt, now that's where that dirt comes into, like organic matter or whatever, you want to make sure you're removing that first by like some sort of towelette or wipe, because if you have a lot of organic material, and this applies, you'll find out later on when we're talking about cleaning and sanitizing, and water sanitation, that if you have organic material and you have a sanitizer, that sanitizer is actually going to bind or attach to that dirt, and then it's just going to do its job on the dirt, not in your hands. So sanitizers need to have that direct contact with the surface in order to do something well. So you want to make sure that you're removing any visible dirt that you can by a wipe or whatnot. Then you can apply your sanitizer, rub it, doing all the same things, and basically just keep rubbing it until it's dry, but all the same process. So when you want to wash your hands, I think it's pretty obvious, but before starting work, after using the toilet, after having a break, sneezing or coughing, we all know those things. Gloved hands came up a little bit earlier about, do we need to wear gloves, or is it a necessity? By no means it's not, and I actually think gloves give people a little bit of a false sense of security. Say, oh, if I'm wearing gloves, everything's fine and dandy. But you have to treat gloves the exact same way as your hands, especially if they're like, say, the rubber or nitrile, which, in the example that you used, probably wouldn't be the case because it's more for warmth rather than protection. You really do need to consider gloves as the same as your hands. So if you are using a latex or rubber or nitrile glove for whatever purpose, you want to make sure that it's being cleaned and sanitized the same way that your hands are, because they can become dirty. A dirty glove is no different than a dirty hand. So again, it's that false sense of security. But where you would want to make sure that you are using a glove is that if you have an open wound or a cut, and you are going to have that direct contact, and you cover it with a waterproof bandage and then put the glove over top, because then now you're protecting the product from being contaminated with whatever might be in your hands or seeping or whatever. So that's a good opportunity to when to use gloves. And then we talked about, they might be using it for irritation or cold, but again, it's kind of like the towel example, that you still need to make sure that, if an auditor is going to come during harvest and, the person's gloves are supposed to be white and they're black, you want to make sure that they are aware that they need to have those on get laundered regularly as well, because they're very difficult if they are once they become contaminated, to make sure they're fully clean and sanitized.
Is there any evidence that hot or cold water makes a difference in hand washing?
No. Obviously if you had boiling, scalding water, that can kill bacteria, right? Because the premise is of boiling, but no. The reason why people tend to use, say, warm water or even tepid, just so people actually keep their hands under a little bit longer for that full 20 seconds. Because if it's ice cold, people will be like, okay, I'm not doing that, so I'm out of here, right? But the only time where that hot water really comes into play is if you make it hot enough to kill the bacteria and the temperatures that we would wash our hands in would fall into that. Yes,
A quick question, just in regards to the potable water in the outhouse.
Yeah.
It does say that you're supposed to test it prior to use, but there are those tabs that you put in the water. Is that?
Like the chlorination tabs?
Chlorine tab, because the water tank is only so big.
Yeah.
So you're going to be changing or refilling it?
Yeah.
So what is the standard?
Well, that you're using potable water to fill it, and that cistern has been cleaned and sanitized. So that you want to make
once prior to use at the beginning of the year?
Yeah, you go ahead.
They changed it for the tank for the outhouses and...
Because I have a GAP certified outhouse.
Yeah.
That's what I had bought.
Okay, so then if you either have to, so you have to have if you're treating it, basically, you either can treat it or have a filling procedure so that you're not contaminating when you're filling it and then testing it ongoing as you're filling it, or you just treat it and then test twice a year to make sure that your treatment is proper, appropriate. So that you don't have to do the cleaning, and then you also have to do like if you're not treating it, you also have to do, so you have to do an SOP for how you fill it, you have to have an SOP for how you clean it, you have to clean it on a monthly basis, and you have to test it to make sure that
There's
it's
a whole bunch of policies, or written policies for that.
Yeah, and you have to create some of your own as well for that.
Because the important point that whenever you have hand washing or using water, that water has to be potable.
Or, so what you either do is there's kind of three options. Treat the water and have a continuous treatment, and then just make sure that treatment works. So that's the two tests.
What's that like?
You could, as long as it's appropriate for, for that kind of use, or maybe adding bleach or something.
It's already municipal water going in there.
Okay, but it's more like if it's sitting in the hot sun, right? And there's
that's
like
what
one
they told me, that you
temperature.
just put those tabs in and it's good to go. It's actually got the witness and all that on that product.
Okay.
And I think in your case, because it's already municipal, you're probably going to test it somewhere else. And I would think that if you can prove by a test,
Yes.
then that would be sort of your support saying, hey, you know what, I use the tab, whatever, it's municipal water, here's a test. I did one test to show that it's doing it.
Well, I do, as a matter of fact, two.
Yeah.
Two in a year.
Yeah, so two in a year, yeah, but yeah.
Two tests, two
prior to
tests, like lab tests of that water throughout your season, like spaced apart, just to make sure that those tabs, when it's the heat of the summer, and there's light, or you might have not been used and been sitting all week, it's still working.
They're still working.
Yeah.
Those are just done at the house.
You can probably get them at the health unit, you can take it to a private lab, there's a couple places to do that. Or you can just put hand sanitizer after,
Yeah.
and then just make sure that they always use it though.
Use both.
Yeah, they use both.
So it's clear as mud.
Yeah.
All right, I've got to get through a lot of minutes, yes.
Speaking of water, they said that almost everything that has gone wrong because of water. So I find that water's a big deal.
Yeah, okay, yep. So some of the stuff I'll probably fly through a little bit. I apologize, I just tend to talk a lot, but like you folks. Sorry, I should go back. So we're going to talk about toilet and hand washing facilities specifically. And there are some requirements that you need to meet as far as distances and that, and they're identified here, but they are specific. Each program will have its own specifics, and you need to make sure that you're, if you are following a program of choice, that you are meeting those requirements. So obviously there's a risk if you have inadequate facilities and you don't have any available at all, pretty high risk. So it's always about that transfer of pathogens. If you're not going to have facilities available, there's a risk there, but if they're not accessible, so people aren't going to use them. If they're 10 miles away, well, that's a pretty good indication they probably won't use them, and that would be more like our poster here would guide people, I shouldn't say guide, people using the facilities using things that aren't approved facilities, we'll just say it that way. Again, and think of yourself, if you went into a facility and it was really grungy and dirty, are you really apt to use it? So again, those things fall under a cleaning and sanitizing program, and then obviously you want to make sure it's properly stocked. So obviously, the potential for fecal contamination can be directly, obviously, related to the use or not using proper facilities and hand washing facilities. Whether it's facility or the field, same rules apply. You still have to wash your hands. You still have to use the proper facilities that are available. You maybe speak to this, but I'm sure this is this is what I've always said, that you can have a hand washing facility standalone, and that needs to be in the production area. But if you have a toilet facility, it cannot stand alone. What I mean by that is that it has to be accompanied by a hand washing facility for obvious reasons, right? You want to make sure people are washing their hands at the facility. Here's another particular case study where, well, it's the same case study. So if you think back to what we were talking about, where that individual, we'll just say, didn't use proper hand washing techniques, so their hands were contaminated. So there's a lot of questions that you can ask. Why were they contaminated? Were they not trained? Were they not aware? Did they not use the facilities? Were the facilities not stocked? You could think of a thousand different scenarios, but again, there's a reason why it happened, and it's important to identify, if that was your operation, why it did in fact happen. Again, the posters that we have to support, really good reference material for posting around the facility, and then to even use as training materials if you need to, because the pictures say more than sometimes the words can. Here's where you get into some of those specific requirements. Again, it will vary depending on the program that you're following, but typically it's a minimum of 1 toilet per 25 workers. No, you don't need one specifically for men and for women, but if you have, maybe a good population of both, it might be a good idea to have more than one. Even just, if you think of yourself, okay, I have 50 minutes for break, and if I have 24 people in front of me, you might just want, again, you might want to increase that depending on what's practical for your facility. Where you're putting these toilet facilities, if they're sort of like the portable ones or the transportable ones, you want to make sure that they're not going to be posing any risk of food production if they fall over or leak. So you want to make sure they're sort of like the hedgerows, far away, or just not in areas close to your product. This is another requirement that you want to make sure that whatever it says in the manual, but you want to make sure as a general rule that they're within 400 meters so they can walk there or get easy transportation. Then again, the hand washing facilities are within or close by that part of the toilet, and it's always, you need to have that appropriate signage to support what you are asking. Now again, I talked about the hand washing facility can stand alone, but it must accompany a toilet washing facility. Available and accessibility, those are really key points that, dandy that you have, but people can't get to or use it, there's no point in really having it at all. Proper stocking and proper signage. This is kind of the same thing. You can see that portable water is highlighted there. We just had that conversation as to why that's important. If your water's not potable, and maybe some people, what I mean by potable is that it's safe to drink. Usually potable and drinking water are sort of interchangeable. So if you were to have that water tested, it would have no level of contamination as far as what they would typically use as indicators of fecal contamination. So it'd be either coliforms or more so now generic E. coli. If that would be, so 0, 0 would be that. We'll talk about that a little bit later on in the water one. But that's what potable water means. So safe for drinking. And then those are the other items that you need to have: soap and sanitizer wipes, wastewater receptacle, one to collect any of that wastewater, but also a waste receptacle for the single-use paper towels, and then just appropriate signage. So clothing and footwear. Oh yes, sir.
So you might have already stated this, and it's probably a pretty basic question, but what is the expectation from a food safety standpoint of hand washing with respect to the toilet and exterior hand washing facilities? So is the expectation that you use the washing hands then the second time and dedicate? What is the purpose ultimately of a dedicated hand washing sink versus toilet facilities?
So in the say for out in the okay, so we'll just say a facility, we'll just say food production area. So food's being processed, packaged, whatever, harvested. So say if your hands get dirty, or, and correct me if I'm not addressing this, but if your hands get dirty or you sneeze or something, that's where you can go and use a hand washing facility. It doesn't necessarily have to have a toilet facility beside it. But if you have a toilet facility, you want to use the toilet facility, you need to have a hand washing facility in the immediate area of that toilet so that people can wash their hands after going to the toilet. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, I just didn't know if there was an expectation that ultimately you had to be using a dedicated hand washing sink.
You don't have, like you don't have, if you've got a bathroom attached to your bathroom, let's say, and you've got hand washing in that bathroom, you don't then have to install an additional sink outside, hand washing sink, unless you're selling plastic.
When it goes to the dwelling conductor, you have to have a separate hand wash station next to where you process out, so it's even though you use washing methods. Doesn't matter if you got to wash it right beside where the hand wash sink is.
They wanted that direct
In
facility.
I'm renovating right now, so I have to wash the sink, hand wash sink, and my washing sink for my restaurant. So dwelling conductor demands a
For
separate
the
hand wash
health
station
units,
that's
yeah.
not in the bathroom.
And that's another good point, that depending on where you, like, yeah, like even the public health standards, or, you know, might have for that region or municipality might have one. I know Dufferin, actually, they're right on top of, like, all that hand washing, and, you know, they're quite, how do I say, they provide a lot of education and resources towards that.
So Canada Gas says no, but then the health unit says yes. Costco, the specific Costco didn't say also you have to have additional hand washing outside.
So how does that practically get implemented? So Toronto Public Health, for example, also states, so our bathroom facilities weren't sufficient, so we have to have a dedicated hand washing sink. But in reality, like, is it safe to say that if you're not using the washroom, you can use the dedicated hand washing sink? But for their purposes, it wasn't sufficient to go into the washroom and wash your hands. So I just need some clarity for our employees of what the actual procedure is supposed to be.
Well, I'm not exactly sure what the health unit expects, but from a Costco perspective, I know that Costco wants the employees to use the bathroom, toilet, wash their hands, and then wash their hands again before they leave the bathroom and come back up and wash them again so that everybody can see them. There has to be that visual public before you actually touch the bathroom door and go outside. The last thing you do before you walk to your workstation is wash your hands with that outside sink.
The same thing with us, and the worker uses the washroom, even when they walk outside that door, the second hand wash station is there. If they're going to go wash lettuce, they have to wash their hands.
Yeah.
at the hand wash station.
So if they're just going to go to the bathroom or home, then they can wash their hands in the bathroom and not use that sink, but makes it.
You just have the outside sink so that you see them wash. I mean, the assumption is probably, who knows if they're going to use it inside if they have to wash them outside.
That's right. And the door. I mean, we all, that dreaded bathroom door, right? Whether it's a push with your kick or if you try and manage to open it with, you know what I mean? It's that dreaded bathroom door. So you might have done a great job washing your hands, but maybe your friend before you didn't. So, you know, it's just that other added. In the facility I worked at, which I do believe they're changing now, but they had obviously potable water, hand washing where the toilets were. And then as they went down into the facility, we had a wall hand sanitizer. And the auditor would specifically watch and say, okay, you know, and that's an automatic fail. If you're being audited and they see that people aren't washing their hands, done. So that's how important it is. So I see time sticking on, but I know we're sort of having an open dialogue anyways we go along, so maybe we can add a bit of time. But anyways, so this one's on clothing, footwear, and personal effects. So personal effects would be, you know, oh sorry, what?
No, because I just had one question about the cantaloupe incident, sorry to go back to it.
Yep.
You said it had to do with the fact that they already had on safety practices, on safety practices. That's what all the girls wanted to play.
You know what, I talk about that, I think it's in the cleaning and sanitize, I use that as a case study. So we'll talk about it, and if that question doesn't get addressed, remind me. But just, I kind of go through the life cycle of what happened in that particular incident. So we'll just park that one for the moment. So when we talk about personal effects, that's like, you know, watches, jewelry, badges, other stuff other than your clothing and your footwear. So again, it's all about that transfer of pathogens, transfer of bacteria. So it can occur if we don't have designated areas to store, say, a street clothes versus a work clothes, or vice versa. You know, if you're working livestock, or if you're working, you know, applying manure, and then you're going to go and harvest, you really really should have something between those two tasks that's either cleaning your clothing or your footwear or an ability to change them. So that's where there can be risks. And, you know, if you have the same items that are worn, rubber boots, great example. I'm wearing rubber boots everywhere. But, you know, you might have to put something in place if you have some higher risk tasks or operations happening at your farm that can cause some other issues. Which actually is kind of one of those things that led to that particular incident, not the rubber boots, but that transfer of high-risk areas to others. And then if items aren't clean or sanitary, again, you can think about those gloves, they can contribute to the food safety risk. So again, it's really identifying what's being used at your operation and really addressing that. So in my non-PDF version, I had these things come in. I was going to ask you guys, do you think, folks, I shouldn't say guys, sorry, if I had covered up these two things, and you were to look at those, would you say that those are fairly comparable as far as, if you were to spread this out a little bit, kind of comparable? And when I say comparable, like the amount of white, the amount of stuff that's on there? I'm going to say yes, because I think it is, and it is. So when we think of cockroaches, I'm sure most people are like, oh, gross, right? Dirty, filthy, disgusting. That's a cockroach. It's not very identified. It's just a cockroach that was placed on the plate. And this is all bacteria. Not saying it's pathogens, we're just talking about bacteria in general, but typically it could be pathogens. That terry cloth towel we were talking about, this is a dirty apron. The dirty apron was touched to that petri dish. Dirty cockroach, dirty clothing. Not a whole lot of difference, and it just shows you how comparable they can be as far as the dirt that they can transfer. We have lots of posters. Take them all. Put them everywhere. And in Canada Gap does as well, just ours. We have color, so you can put them both up. So I know it's not one or the other. I'm not trying to say that. It's just that, you know, at one time they were black and yellow because they all came from Cornell University. And so we thought, you know what, I think we should put our own name on our own stuff, so we did that. So anyway, so the posters just help reinforce those best practices and really help train. And again, it's really a nice visual. People walking up to your facility and you say, oh wow, hand wash, oh, I better wash my hands, you know. It's just, again, it's just creating that sense that everybody has that responsibility. So as with anything on farm, you need to be providing those clear instructions. And when it comes to clothing, footwear, or whatever else, it's no different. So some of those things that you need to account for, that you need to have some designated areas for those different, you know, whether it's work items or street clothes or personal effects or medications. You need to make sure that your workers have designated areas to store things, whether it be lockers, you know, if they have sort of work boots or field boots that they, you know, that they have this place to put them, or what, you know, if they are wearing them in different areas, you know, maybe this is this is probably more common in a livestock operation, but, you know, maybe it's something that applies to your facility if you have, you know, a pack house or, you know, something else where people might be wearing the same equipment. Not recommended, but it is a possibility, right? I mean, things cost money. Make sure that you're just being aware with them about what those clear instructions are and those clear expectations. And, you know, make sure you're providing clean areas for clean clothes. You know, if that is a distinction that you have in your operation, there's no point in storing clean clothes where everything else is dirty. Again, it's a whole transfer. So this is the last section in this particular one, illness, and then a couple slides with regards to worker practice, like just training specifically. But illnesses and injury, again, we talked a little about, hopefully if someone's vomiting or puking or have diarrhea, that they're not going to be coming to work. There are other situations where they might not realize they're sick, and they might come to work. But, you know, it's really important that, you know, if someone is displaying symptoms of illness, whatever, that's sort of a red flag that goes up, say, hey, you know what, there is a potential risk to my product, and I need to make some changes. The degree of someone's health, same like your hands, just because your hands look clean doesn't mean they are. Because someone looks healthy doesn't mean they are, or they might not, you know, they might have hepatitis A, or they might just, I have an example here very quickly about typhoid Mary. She never exhibited any symptoms of typhoid, but yet she made people sick and some people died as a result of her. Only 40% of people who actually, you know, carry a virus shed it in their fecal matter. This is really not a great topic for lunch. Be thankful that it's not the manure one. That's all I can say. My digest said is tomorrow's before lunch. But anyways, and then again, it's that idea that, you know, carriers of viruses, you don't always display the symptoms of their illness. So obviously these are signs that if anybody's, if you have some of these things, some are very apparent, some aren't. Again, it's having that open conversation with your workers to say, hey, listen, you know what? We need to keep the product safe, so let's work together on this. 2 incidents, Mary Malone, typhoid Mary, an individual that, was displaying jaundice, yelling in the eye. So again, they came to work with yelling, you'd be like, hey, not happening. The unfortunate aspect of typhoid Mary, and I use her as an example, she was a cook in a summer rental home, back in 1906 or something. The family members started to become sick and they weren't really sure why. She was preparing their food. And then she, transient kind of went place to place to place. People were kind of getting sick in her wake, and then people were starting to get more sick and dying, and they looked into it a little bit more. And it was because she was a carrier of typhoid, didn't display any symptoms, but her practices, not using, maybe washing her hands or covering them, whatever. She shouldn't be working with food, regardless. And she was contaminating the product that people were eating. People were sick, and like I said, some people actually died. So you don't always know. But anyway, so. Some other things with illnesses and injury, we talked a little about, you can assign some of those people depending on what they're experiencing, maybe some non-food activities, mowing the grass or other, whatever it might be, but something that's not directly involved with the product. If they have a respiratory illness, especially when we saw SARS, everybody it seemed was wearing a mask. There's a good option if you have that available or if you want to have that on hand. Tissues really should be discarded after use. I cringe every time my dad pulls out that infamous hanky out of his pocket. I'm like, get rid of that thing. And it's like, anyways, it's gross. So just, again, it's having that open dialogue. One important thing on this slide, there's a lot of important things. We talked about the glove use if you have a wound. But this is important, and this is a requirement, that you need to have one certified first aid person in the vicinity of your workers. And I believe that's true. And
We have to have.
Or one in the whole.
A kit, like a first aid kit.
Yeah. Oh, so you don't need to have a trained first aid person?
Not for us.
Okay.
For facilitate another program.
Okay, so there are, yes, so the program that we were on where I worked at the apple packing facility, the farmers that were going to those programs, because that program not only covered food safety, but also covered worker wellness and welfare. You needed to have one certified individual in first aid, so not bad practice anyways.
When we did that sample, the link to do a self-assessment, it did have a certified personnel, so is that not yours?
That's not Canada. We've been.
Yeah, so those self-assessments are associated with the Going Forward 2 program. And when we created those self-assessments, are again based on those top 5.
Yeah.
And we generally took common requirements or those most important requirements. So not all food safety programs, again, it's always important. Those are just sort of suggested, those are best practices.
Workman's compensation has
Ministry of Labor says you have to.
Yeah.
There you go. So, and that's the one that's now on farm, is it not? It's now applicable on farm. So there you go.
And it doesn't matter how many people, like we have one for 7 people.
No, I think it's typically where there's one either at the facility or one where there's workers going to be working, like, you know what I mean? So you don't want to have it the farm owner, and that farm owner's not around when maybe people are harvesting in that, or when you have your most crew, or you don't want it to be sort of like the son that's off away at school, what everybody's doing.
Right. Does the ministry have any training programs in Spanish for people? So training one of your guys if you're not there?
Not for first aid. I've been looking around for that.
Okay.
And just isn't around.
And then I have just bolded it, I know it doesn't look maybe bolded under these slides, but it's really important to have an incident management plan. And what that means is, again, if there was something to happen, accidents happen, if someone wants to get cut, blood all over some product, I know, I'm sorry that it sounds so gory, but it's really not, or someone did vomit, or something happened that could impact your, what does the worker do with that product? They don't know, they're like, all right, let's just keep packing, let's just wash it off. That might not be appropriate, right? Or whatever the fact might be, make sure that you have a management plan for situations that occur. Do they put it aside for evaluation, do they put it aside to be tested? Or, you know what? Is the bushel of apples really worth it? Let's just discard it, make it waste. That's what's involved with an incident management plan. So I talked about the worker training a little bit. I was going to do a group exercise, but basically, you know, what sort of things would you include when you're training new workers? A lot of these you'll see on that C&D list in the Canada Gap manual. So those are things that you would want to talk to your workers about. Again, so it's applicable to your farm, your operation, but to Katijah's point, you can't say, oh, well, I'm not doing that, so I'm not doing it. No. You really need to look, say, oh, I have workers, okay, I might not use aprons, so that's not applicable, but you know what, they really need to be trained in hand washing and I need to have potable water, blah, 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 blah. So, and it really is important, you know, to share that knowledge, to make them aware why they're doing it. That's really important. When I helped a producer, he said, you know, we did it because we were told to do it, but now we actually understand why, and my workers understand why. And for him, that was a world of difference because of like, hey, boss, I did this and this and this. And, you know, again, it's that sense of ownership and that they're happy that they've done it. So there, you're done. So, sorry. So I took a little bit longer because I know the food was coming in, but I guess until the food actually arrives, if there's any, maybe Katijah could just share a couple points about, you know, when she audits, because she does do farm audits, you know, maybe with regards to worker practice and that some of those deficiencies maybe that we haven't talked about or that you'd like to talk about further. Sure.
Yeah. So just, I think Colleen already mentioned that, we have, in the Canada Gap program, we have several things that are automatic failure items. That doesn't mean that the audit stops, but it does mean at this point, you can't be certified unless you correct it. You correct that problem, and you submit your corrective action, the auditor will evaluate. So one of those automatic failures is if first of all, if you don't provide the properly stocked, fully stocked hand washing station, so you just had soap and water, no paper towels, and for your employees, that would be an automatic failure. It's a pretty easy corrective action. You would properly stock it, take a photo, and then train your employees about, you know, that they have to use the new paper towels and so on. Send that to your auditor, and they would issue you could issue your certification. So that's one, improperly stocked hand washing. That's very, very common. Especially because for people who don't have water, they can't do water, they can do hand sanitizer with hand wipes. So the idea is that you take the majority of the dirt and anything else off first with the hand wipe, follow with the hand sanitizer. A lot of people forget that hand wipe step, so they're only providing sanitizer.
And they forget that you have to have a waste basket for the house.
That too. So, and so that's where a lot of people would fail because they're only or the employees are just using sanitizer. They either don't know to use it, they forget to use the wipe when the wipe's not there. Same with the soap and water hand washing, they just have, if they don't have new towels or they have a cloth towel or something like that. Another person who failed is hand dryers. Now, unfortunately, at this point, Canada Gap will not allow hand dryers, even if they're the really fancy NSF certified Dyson ones. Right now they're looking into it, but they don't know where to draw the line because there's ones like they have at Tim Hortons sometimes, they're like, basically you put your hand under there and nothing happens, and now they're like doing this on the way out. So right now that would be an automatic fail as well. Another thing we look for in worker training, again, this is not an automatic fail, it would be a score, you get a score on it, so you have to have 80% to pass the audit. But we talk to the employees, we watch them work, we ask them if they've been trained, we ask them who trained them, we ask them their names, and then we go check the training list to see if you have, you know, a training sign-off for that person's name. So we do some cross-referencing, some verification just to kind of make sure you're not taking the lapses, and nothing's behind it. And then the other thing we do is watch them, if we can catch them on a break, and then going back to work, we'll just stand back and watch to see, okay, are they washing their hands before they go back to work? And if we see that they're not, again, if we see them using the washroom and going back to work without washing their hands, that is also an automatic failure.
Is that going back to work in like the production area?
No.
Or to the field?
That's a very good distinction. If they go to work directly handling product, then that would be good. If they're, again, sweeping the floor, just mowing or, you know, trim pruning or something that's, you know, not handling the product, that would be an automatic failure.
What about final packaging area?
If they're, again, handling anything related, like if there could have an impact on the food safety
mistake, or is it a more systemic issue, because that might be, difference in corrective action. We would look, but generally we look for retraining. So a record that that person was retrained and what they were retrained on. Most of the time it's just an employees, people make mistakes. And if it was something more systemic, we'd have to talk about it, but maybe that their policies are not in place, or maybe the person, again, needs to write a new policy that matches up with what they're actually doing, so there's that issue. Usually it's just a retraining.
Now, when you talk about trainer, like, can we be the trainer?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And we look for policy, like you have a written policy that you train on, which C and form, that those forms, C and D can be a written policy that you train on. And we also just make sure that the written policy matches what people have been told. And what is really in effect. The other thing we look for in terms of, if you are providing soap and water hand washing, but all your signs are about hand sanitizer, well, that doesn't really match with something. Or the opposite is what we see most often, that they're providing hand wipes and sanitizer, but all the hand washing signs say use soap and water. So we see that often. Again, it's not on my field, but we wouldn't take off the points. We wouldn't give points for having hand washing signs in that case because they're not correct. They don't match.
So the training is just being able to sign it is good enough?
Yeah, you basically deliver the training to them. It could be verbally, it could be depending on your policy, you might just take C and D and have them read it if they can read English, or have it translated into Spanish and have them read it and sign off, yes, I understood that.
Because a lot of the things with the safety side, personal safety, the inspectors want to see what they were taught and more or less questions and answers.
Like a test?
Like a small, even true false test, just to show that they understood.
Right.
What was taught.
And that's,
you don't need that.
you don't have to do that for the Canada Gap program. It's a great practice. I would highly recommend it. Other programs I think would require that, but Canada Gap does not require that exercise.
And I think that's also sort of to the point of why when an auditor goes out there that they want to interview employees, that's sort of like your mini self-assessment, that's like your oral test, right? To see if you want to have been trained but maybe completely comprehend what's being taught.
Yeah, and sometimes, there are definitely language issues when we go out when we're auditors, and I have a little bit of Spanish. But yeah, exactly, and one thing we do is we get them to demonstrate. And we understand too, sometimes they get really nervous, and sometimes they don't know what you're asking. So we try to give a little bit of consideration, considering like, okay, is this just like just freaking out, because sometimes they do, right? Especially if they're offshore workers and they have no idea who you are or why you're there, and there's this language barrier, and you're asking all these questions. And so, we try to be a little bit considerate to the situation as well, not really mess them up.
We had a consultant come, and when she went out and talked to our workers, I did some training, but I wanted her to see if I did it enough. And she asked about them, what do you do? She go, and she did this, and they went like this, and I was so proud because I actually taught it. And that's what she said too, is even with the offshore workers, a lot of it is just showing them, physically showing them. Like they might not understand our language. I don't speak Spanish, but they do understand a lot of stuff like that.
Yeah, I know some of our auditors will point to, you see something with, you could find an apple that's on the ground that looks crummy or has a bird food on it, say, what would you do with this? Would you put it in the basket? And they go, no, that kind of stuff. So we get by the language barrier, and there's certainly issues, but that's kind of turning it to the other side of training, it's other things that you can do as well.
Yep, so I'm sure you guys are probably done with sitting and listening for a while, so I guess break time, watch your break time, and then I guess Franco will kind of direct people when I think the food's just coming in on the table. So, but during this break, anytime you have questions or whatever, if you think of them at the end or write them down, just come and talk to any one of us that not. So.
Great.